Give me the gist of it.
The gist that I'm getting kind of obsessed with now is formulas. So you had for context, you had talked to me about how you're learning Spanish. And you had made that
Yeah.
comment about, okay, I'm learning vocabulary and grammar, and I just sort of put them together, right? And that's a really
Yeah.
common thought that people, or a really common model that people have about language. Oh, it's just you have grammar, which is like the rules for how you put stuff together, and then you have the vocabulary, which
Yeah.
is just the stuff, right? And on top of
Yeah.
that, you have like suffixes and prefixes and whatever, but that's just like extra bits. But then the book I'm reading is playing, and also that idea that you expressed is like generative linguistics. It's everything that I studied. It's the whole school of thought around how the human language faculty works and blah blah blah. But
Hmm.
what I think my first thought that I've known for a while is that it's completely useless for language learning, totally useless, because you can learn grammatical patterns and memorize words all you want, but it's not going to help you put them together into sentences that native speakers would actually say. And I think that's sort of the key
Right.
insight that I've been following for a couple years now. But I found this recent book talking about formulas in language, and pay very close attention to language in general. When any kind of language, obviously in your native language especially, but things are not
Hmm.
just randomly put together; they are formulaic. So we have the most common example is like rituals like hello, goodbye, um,
Yeah.
which by themselves don't really mean anything, but in a social context they mean something. But even most other language is not totally novel. It is made up of prefabricated bits. I don't know. We could go deeper into that, but that's kind of the
You
basic
mean
idea.
like premeditated chunks?
Basically, yeah. Like
Yeah.
I'm trying to think.
Hasta luego. Like
Osloiga was one. Yeah, exactly.
por
Yeah,
aquí.
yeah, and that's actually
Yeah.
two words, right? Uh,
Mm.
until later. And you could imagine they could say it differently if they wanted to. I mean, it could be grammatical. In English, we don't say until later. We say see you later. Well, you're not really going to be seeing
Yeah.
me anywhere. I mean, you might see me, you might not, right? I mean, it's kind of it's kind of
Yeah.
meaningless, but it's just a set
Yeah.
phrase. It's
Idioms.
idioms exactly, but most people think of. I think that's what's interesting, and that's one idea I think that kind of triggered my journey down this road is idioms,
Yeah.
but not just idioms, but because people think of idioms as these kind of as like proverbs, right? Like an apple a day keeps the doctor away. It's just a phrase. It's a set
Figure of
phrase.
speech.
It's a figure exactly a figure of speech. But
Yeah.
idiomatic language goes deeper um, in the sense that it's a language usage that's reflected by the way native speakers use the language, and it's actually one of the easiest ways to tell that someone is not a native speaker. Even if they can pronounce things
Mm.
properly, they don't put words together the way you would. And maybe what they said made sense, but it isn't how you put
Yeah.
it together. One example is collocations, which is like um, words that just go together in a set. Like I asked Veronica this, and she actually got this right. And my wife, um, what was it? Oh, um, you do something and there's a benefit, and the verb that you use you blank the benefit. What verb goes there?
You reap the
You
benefit.
reap the benefits. Yeah. So it's a specific
The reaping is like
collocation.
a harvesting
A
term.
harvesting. Yeah. So it kind of has a little bit of a
Yeah.
figure. I actually think it might be biblical.
Agricultural.
Agricultural, right? Because so as you reap, or sorry, as you sow,
You
so
reap
shall
what you
you
sow.
reap, right? Yeah. So it kind of
Yeah.
almost has a figure of speech contained in that collocation, but that's consistently used. We take a risk. Um, something poses risk. That's a very
Yeah.
another anyway. Everything's collocations, and also words don't mean
But
anything. They're only words don't have meanings. They have usages, and everything is contextual. And a lot of phrases and idiomatic usages, they don't really mean anything. They just have a social connotation, and that's what everyone uses to speak. And so most of the time, people don't even know what they're saying or what anybody else is saying. Anyway. So that's where I've kind of.
But like, is a co-location? What's the difference between a co-location and an idiom?
An idiom. Well,
You know?
I mean, actually, in Spanish, the word idioma means
Language.
just means language in general, right? So
Yeah.
so it's kind of a funny word, and I don't know what the original meaning was in English. I just know that nowadays when people say idiom, they typically mean a figure of speech, which is a complete sentence,
Yeah.
usually with a meaning that is not obvious from the parts. So in linguistics they would call it opaque. The meaning is opaque. You just have to know. I learned a Polish idiom today. Fear has big eyes.
Yeah.
Is the Polish idiom. If you know what it literally means, but the hidden meaning is sometimes things look worse than they actually are.
Right.
So that's like the proverbial meaning. But there are other ones that are even more opaque, like I got it. What's a really like? Oh, kick the bucket is a very common English phrase. Completely opaque. No idea what, but it means die. Right.
Yeah.
So a collocation usually refers to just two words, but
I mean that co-location would function to mask the emotional valence of a Stark event.
it could have a social reason for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to get at the root of why we, as humans, create these co-locations or idioms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do they just kind of? Do you realize in your kind of linguistic research or study that they just kind of naturally form over time, or they're like, commonalities of like why they form in certain cultures, or
They form in all cultures.
across cultures?
Yeah, they seem to form in all cultures.
But like why?
But they are cultural, first of all. So good. That's a good point to make, like you just said. And I think that's kind of what this book is basically about. Is like why. First of all, there are formulas, which again, if you want to get deeper into like the conspiracy side of things, Chomsky is like known as the kingpin of linguistics. But so much of what he says doesn't really pan out, and it doesn't really get addressed. And this book is like 20 years old, I think. But I never learned anything about anything like this in school when I was studying linguistics.
Right.
But one explanation that she gives.
How far did you go in school?
What do you mean?
Linguistics.
I have a master's in linguistics, a master's degree by research.
Okay.
So that means I wrote something too. Actually,
You did some doctorate level stuff too, right?
No, not really.
No.
But I mean, not really. Planning a little bit, but never got into it.
I see. Gotcha.
I actually did just meet up with my old supervisor though. And she was asking me for some data. So anyway, so maybe my name will go on something too. Who knows? I'll be co-author just because I gathered some data. Although the data that she had was
Mr. Selkirk
was quite interesting. Yeah, not quite doctor, but Mr.
Yeah. But you were saying about this book.
So about the book, what this woman is arguing is, so she's talking about why did the formulas form, and she gives a few ideas. I'm only like halfway through the book, and one of them is, one of the ideas is processing. So instead of having to come up with a new utterance every time you want to say something, humans actually end up in the same situations over and over and over. So it's a lot easier to just use a prefabricated chunk that you've already used before, and it may have a complex internal structure.
Use a little linguistic snippet or macro, essentially.
Basically a macro, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so there's processing on the speaking side. There's processing on the listening side, and then there's also. She ultimately starts to go at it from a cultural perspective, which is language is used as a way to get people to do things for you, especially when you first start using language because you're a kid and you can't do anything.
Right.
So you're constantly trying to change your social environment, basically your material and your social environment. And so, because one of the main formulas that people first pointed out when they were looking at this stuff is obviously politeness formulas, which kids are intentionally and very consciously sort of inducted into. Say please and thank you or whatever, right? But there are other formulas that are kind of politeness formulas that are not just please and thank you, but excuse me, A weird one is like bless you. Everyone compulsively says bless you when you sneeze, right? It just means nothing, but we always say it, right? Um, but yeah. So those are some of the reasons that she gives. But to me, the reason why it's blowing my mind, I guess, in the larger sense is, yeah, people, were when you're talking about sharing ideas like you do on the podcast and
Yeah.
the marketplace of ideas or whatever you want to call it, which has been kind of a term lately, right? What
Yeah.
form are those ideas?
Freedom of speech.
Freedom,
in the
freedom of
marketplace
speech.
ideas.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
All this. What form are those ideas actually expressed in? And do you even
Yeah.
know what's coming out of your mouth?